Andrea Swensson here, host of the local show Connecting Now with Dayna Frank, owner of First Avenue. Hey, Dana.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm good.
We're both in Minneapolis, just a few blocks away, but because of the world right now, connecting over Zoom. And I am just so eager to talk to you about everything that's been going on, not just here in the Twin Cities, but nationally. There's a movement afoot about getting independent music venues all on the same page and really taking action to have support right now in a time of absolute crisis for the industry. And I would love to hear, just in the beginning, tell me about those first days as we were learning the severity of the coronavirus and the impact that that was going to have on First Avenue. Walk me through a little bit of, your realization of just how serious it was going to be and what you wanted to do about it.
Yeah, I mean, we started talking about coronavirus internally probably mid-February, just trying to keep an ear on what was going on in the world and how we could best prepare. And, at that time, it was like, wash your hands. And if you feel sick, don't come to work. Now we think back to that, being like, oh, those were the days. Like, I was at the club the other day and saw, like a flyer that we had posted by the sink, like, here's how you can keep everyone safe. And it's like, oh yeah, that wasn't true. But we were trying the best we can. And then probably around March 10th, 9th, the dominoes really started to fall. So it was like, first Seattle shut down their venues over 250. And then I think DC, and our friends at the 930 Club just announced no shows, and that's when it was like, oh wow, okay. So then Friday, Thursday night, we had Chelsea Cutler in the main room, and watching sound check and just thinking like, okay, this is gonna be the last show probably for a while. And we were kind of watching the counts, and it was a sold out show, and we maybe had like 1,200 people come. So like, oh god, this is like, people aren't feeling comfortable, and this is not this isn't good. So the next day was Friday the 13th, and we kept watching the news and talking to the governments, and being like, can we have a show, can we not, like, tell us like what is going on. And then finally it was around, I think, 4 or 5 p.m., and we had a band loaded into the Fine Line, and finally we were like, we can't do a show tonight, it's not the right thing to do. So we pulled the plug, maybe around the same time as the governor's mandate, but probably like even a little bit before, because it just, again, if you can think back to those times, the news was just moving so fast. It's like literally every 20 minutes there was like a new update or a new press conference. And so finally you just get to a point where you're like, you can't wait for a mandate to come down. Like, you just have to make a decision and move forward. So we decided that we were calling everything off. And then we spent basically the weekend making our making our plans. And I always point out that a band loaded into the Fine Line because there was literally no preparation. So we had, like, our whole industry shut down on 3 hours notice. So we spent that weekend being like, okay, if we're still closed on April 1st, here's our plan. If we're still closed on May 1st, here's our plan. Because also thinking back, like, no one knew we were going to be in for a year shutdown, 18 months, whatever it's going to be. So um, we made all of our plans, and then by that Monday, all the plans were out the window, or they were all out the door. It was like, oh no, this is the long term. And then we had to furlough all of our employees. You've heard the story before, worst day in the history of any business owner's life. Just the worst. So we had to do that, and then we kept reading about the government programs and trying to stay on top of that. And just, I basically spent my time calling my business owner friends, being like, okay, what are you hearing, what are you doing, how are you handling this, and just trying to like soak in as much information and trying to learn. And because no one has ever been in this situation before. So I have not thought about that period in March for a long time, so I'm like, oh, it's all rushing back.
Mm.
So then we had our anniversary on April 3rd. So then it became, after that March, I would say, 13th to 20th, it just became really clear, like, oh, this isn't even going to be a 3-month thing. This is going to be probably until there's a vaccine thing. So then we started thinking, well, how does any business last being shut down for 18 months? I mean, the, no, I mean, there's no conceivable way that any business can handle all the expenses of, operations, much less, you know, huge rents, huge overhead, insurance, property taxes. Like, if you think about, internet companies, their overhead versus like hundreds of thousands of square feet of retail spaces, it's just so, the what we kept coming back to is like, well, there's going to have to be a government situation, a government, I don't want to say bailout, but like, we're closed because of a public health crisis, and it's absolutely the right thing to do. And in no way are we ever advocating for opening timelines, because we're not doctors. So that's not, that's not our decision to make, and that's nothing like anyone should be listening to me about when we should be opening. Um, but if we're closed for public health, we just need a hand getting through this to handle the expenses.
Right. So you formed NEVA. Tell me
Yeah.
tell
So
us what NEVA is.
yes. So it all happened really quickly, right? Within the course of like 1 or 2 weeks of like, oh, this isn't going to be a 2 week or a 6 week shutdown. This is going to be a really extended period. And the only way that First Avenue or the clubs like it across, there's a First Avenue in every town, right? There's the Troubadour and the 930 and the Masquerade and stuff. I mean, there's just the First Avenue is iconic to Minneapolis, but every town has their iconic venue, and the only way that we're all going to survive is with government support. And so, First Avenue in Minneapolis asking the federal government for something, it's like, oh, who cares? But if we all gather together, the idea is that we can unify, have one ask and use our each of our positions in our local towns to amplify our messages. And so that was really at the root of forming NEVA, the National Independent Venue Association.
I'm curious, have there been conversations? Obviously, there hasn't been a crisis to this scale before, but had there been conversations in the past about independent venues working together in this way? Or like, why didn't this exist before?
I mean, independent promoters are really proud. They're fiercely independent. Like, I like to say, no one just like happens to be independent. You have to fight to be independent. Like every few years or every decade, I should say, there's like a roll up. One company is like, oh, we're going to acquire all the independents and we're going to get this big monolithic corporation. And then that, something happens and that company falls apart. And then a new one thinks they have the brilliant idea to roll up all the independents and cause a giant monster national company. So again, we're like kind of used to that, used to these cycles. So you have to fight really hard to stay independent and stay committed to your community. So with those constant roll-ups comes some like wariness, knowing that somebody's always kind of coming after you. There isn't a huge tendency to work together to be collaborative. And so, it takes a crisis moment like this where all of us, our voice might be really strong in Minneapolis, but federally, it doesn't mean much. So all the clubs across the country are realizing that, but also realizing that this has to be a federal issue. So we all need each other in order to get our message across.
Right. So now we're 3 months into this whole process, and you've been super active at the front lines. You've been doing interviews with national press about NEVA. You've been encouraging people to write their representatives. How would you describe the progress that's been made so far?
I mean, the conversations we're having are really great. I mean, I would say that it's going as well as humanly possible without having anything to show for it, without having any support. We NEVA started. We hired our lobbyist on like April 8th, I think, April 7th, 8th, something like that. And so it was after the first 3 stimulus bills. And so at the time, the thought was there was going to be this 4th stimulus bill in May. So we're like, we got to hit the ground running. And literally it was, 18 hours a day. It was probably 200 independent venue owners and promoters working 18 hours a day, making this push towards May. Well, then that pushed to June. Now that pushed to July. So we're still having great conversations, and we're still really hopeful and optimistic that support will come when Congress passes their next stimulus bill. There's an act we really like called the Restart proposal from Senators Bennett and Young. Um, and I know so much more about the federal government, the federal lobbying, more than I ever wanted to know. The fact that I even like know all this shit is crazy. But yeah, so there's a proposal we really like called Restart. We hear it's getting some traction. And we've been told by a number, I mean, more than a majority in the House and the Senate, that they support us and they fight for us and they understand how distressed our industry is and that there will be some support coming. So we're hopeful.
That's good. That's good to hear.
But still write your representatives, because you never know.
Yeah. So there's been some headlines recently about what Live Nation is doing to respond to the crisis, and that their plan includes shifting some of the risk in the coming months, years to the artists to carry the burden for whether or not people feel safe to go back to shows. Has there been conversations among the independent venues about, what the approach is going to be if and when it does come time to reopen?
I mean, it just, honestly, I read the memo and it just made me really, really grateful that we we didn't sell and that we are still independent and that we can make the offers and make the deals that we feel that's best for both the artists and the promoters and the venues. Um, all the promoters in NEVA, we're all competitors, so we don't talk about our deals. There's pretty strong antitrust laws about that. Um, and so we as an organization aren't discussing like joint offers or anything like that. But I think what's so special about all the promoters is that we all have 100% control of our companies and to be able to make the offers that we feel are best. So, the offers that are best in Minneapolis might not be what's best in Austin, it might not be what's best in Nashville. So that's what I think is so special about being independent. So, but yeah, no, you look at the Live Nation memo and you're like, oh wow, that's one offer template for the entire country. I mean, I don't know. That's certainly not anything that we'd be interested in.
That's fascinating that you can't have those conversations because of antitrust laws. So it really is, when you're making an offer, it's based on your one market.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, even though we're 1% of the market and Live Nation is 85 or whatever, because we're competitors, the antitrust laws protect against our collaborating on offers like that.
Wow.
See, other things I had no idea before 3 months ago. Who knew?
So I want to talk more about First Ave specifically. There's just so much going on. It's like hard to even process like that we're still worried about First Ave's future among all the other things that we're worried about. But I found myself certainly guilty of just assuming, because First Ave has gone through so much in its 50 years of existence and gone through bankruptcy and come out the other end and thrived and expanded, that I think I just have been taking it for granted. Like it's just always going to be there. And it was your interview in Rolling Stone where you're really breaking down the economics of what it takes to keep a venue operating, and why even in this specific time of a calendar year, this is so troubling. It just sent an absolute chill down my spine. And I've been thinking about this in the back of my mind ever since, of like, is there a chance that First Ave would not make it through this?
I mean, first of all, I love that you even think that. It tells me that we're doing our job, because people shouldn't think about First Ave when they go to a show, right? Like they should think about the artist, and they should think about the person they're with, and they should think about the experience and like the emotional connection to the music. They shouldn't be thinking about sponsors or about like, even the physical space as much. Like it should be all about like your relationship to the artist and what you're going through in your life right now. So I love so much that that you take it for granted, or that people take it for granted that it'll always be there. That is like the biggest compliment in the world. But you just look at the hard economics of it, and it's just it's numbers. It's not if we want it to survive, or if we're not working hard, or if we're not like putting everything we have into. Obviously, everyone is. So it's just a matter of like, where's the revenue going to come from, like, and that's I think why the other place where there's a couple of places where independents are like just extremely distressed right now. One is there's no access to capital, so like you go to banks, and in order for a bank to lend you, they have to be able to collateralize you. But if you don't have a reopen date, if you're just stuck in this like indeterminate, like, well, after a vaccine, that could be 6 months, it could be 24 months, they can't collateralize you, so they can't lend you. And so then, well, but then the bills keep coming. So like, where are you going to get that money if you can't go to a bank and you don't have a corporate parent and you don't have ancillary businesses, right? Like, we don't own our ticketing company, we don't own sponsorship arms, we don't own uh you know resell ticket resellers. Like, we're First Avenue. You know exactly what we are. So it's literally just it's like just a factual, like, well, where's that going to come from? So that's, I think, what the Rolling Stone article, what that broke down really well, of like, well, the way the concert industry works, and again, this is common for every venue in Neva. You prepay your insurance, you give holiday bonuses, you do your capital improvements in January when the rooms are closed, and you take on major planning projects, um, because you look at your ticket counts. Like, we had 28 sold out shows in April. Like, April was going to be by far the best month. We had, I mean, I don't want to start crying because it is on camera, but like our 50th anniversary, we had underplays and like the coolest fucking shows that I never even thought I would ever get to see at First Ave. Throughout the entire year, it was like, so we looked at our ticket counts and we looked at our calendar and we're like, oh, we can invest in a couple of these projects, and we can be generous, and we can do the things that we normally would do. And then everything shut down on 3 hours notice, and you're like, oh, okay, I wish I could go back and, anyway, woulda, shoulda. So it's just literally, just a numbers question of like, well, if the banks won't loan to us, and we still have all these expenses that we have to pay, because you still have lights, you still have a rebuild at the Turf Club, you still have insurance that you still have to pay. I mean, sales taxes, property taxes. Like, the government was, they let us abate for a few months, and then they were like, nope, pay us now. And we're like,
Mm.
okay, so that's how are we going to do that? But again, we were fortunate to get a PPP loan, so that was helpful for the first couple months. And so again, you know, we're there's no timeline for us, and so the bank, again, without access to like capital, it's really a government. It's up to the government at this point.
Wow. You mentioned the Turf Club. Can you tell us how the Turf Club is doing right now? What
Oh,
happened to the Turf Club?
oh man, Turf Club is gutted right now. It is, yeah, it'll be a total rebuild, unfortunately.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So this is all happening in tandem with another crisis here in the Twin Cities, the killing of George Floyd and the uprising and unrest that happened in the weeks after that, the protests that continue to this day. It feels like reckoning on top of reckoning right now with everything that's going on. And First Ave has also played a role in contributing to the conversation around confronting racism and white supremacy in the music industry. And I know you and I have talked about this before, that that this is an institution that has a voice and that contributes to political and social issues. But tell me more about what you see as First Ave's role in that conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting because in any other moment, we would be hosting benefits and we'd be donating money, and we'd be doing, like block parties, and doing what we could to move, push the movement forward, and gather people, and lead to action. And that obviously we can't be doing right now. But we really took a hard look and at exactly what you're saying, like, what is our responsibility as uh, a business, a socially responsible business, that, the first time we jumped into this was with the gay marriage amendment in 2012. And, being a gay woman, and being in Minnesota, it really felt like, okay, we're going to say something about this. And we put up a billboard, and I had saying, First Avenue supports the right to freedom to marry. And so at the time, now it's like, well, duh. But at the time, it was really like, we had no idea how people would react and if we would get major backlash and if we'd be shut down because of it. But we heard from the campaign that that billboard was a turning point in getting businesses to support gay marriage. And
Wow.
that for us doing that really caused other businesses to feel safe or to lead them to use their voice. And so we look at First Avenue really similarly in this moment of like, well, how can we, you know, be leaders and try to, lend some support to other businesses that are maybe wavering on whether or not they want to support the issue or if they want to use their voice. And so if we can be, the first ones to jump in and to make a statement and to, use our stance as a business to push forward, social justice and racial justice issues, that's what we want to do.
Yeah. Wow. It's so hard to think about, the future and what the future of First Avenue looks like right now because we don't know when and how. But has there been talk amongst your staff about, actions that you might take as venues and as creating safe spaces, things that maybe you want to re-examine or do differently moving forward?
Oh, as far as our operations, yeah. So we're working on an equity framework for our organization, and this is another one of like the special things that we can do now that because we're closed, because in a normal course we'd be doing 1,200 shows a year, like you know, anywhere from 4 to 10 shows a night, but really examining everything from hiring practices to who's on our stages to security measures to you saw we made a statement on using off-duty cops, how we can keep all of our patrons safe and how we can again use our access as a cultural leader. I makes me uncomfortable saying that, but use the platform that we have in order to push forward a variety of voices and social equity.
Yeah, right on. Well, those were all the kind of the main things I wanted to ask you about, but I just, being able to check in with
What
you.
do you think we could be doing?
Oh, but well, I mean, I think a lot of us in these, as you said, roles where we're playing either a gatekeeping role or a significant role in shaping culture. There's been a lot of like self-reflection right now. So, I mean, I would think that the things that I'm thinking about are probably the things that you're thinking about, but um, it goes down to, representation and what are we doing to actively confront the systems of white supremacy and segregation, which is a huge issue in the Twin Cities, and making sure that that doesn't just like fall away once the urgency has passed from this crisis that we're in. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if that's an answer, but like I think the conversations right now are so important, and I hope that we can all keep talking about whiteness and white supremacy and what we're going to do to fight these systems moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I know at First Avenue, like we feel like this is just the start. I'm hoping most companies and most businesses are the same. Of like, it's one thing to post a social media or like a black square, but like you got to really dig in and do the work and make your organization more equitable. And that's just again what we put a DEI framework into place a couple years ago, and we're seeing some really great changes, but acknowledging that it hasn't gone far enough, and we need to like dig in even further and again like open the hood and pull apart every single one of our practices and think like, is this the most equitable way that we could be doing this? Is this giving everybody a platform and a voice and amplifying the what we want it to amplify?
Yeah. I think about it intersectionally too. There's been such a conversation this week in the local music scene about abuse and sexual harassment and assault. And I know that you take all of that super seriously as well because we've attended trainings together, gone to talks about, making spaces safer. And it just feels like because everything is halted and we're in this moment of just crisis, but also reflection, maybe there is a chance that culture could really dramatically shift after this. And you mentioned, the gay marriage amendment too. Like, I see some parallels in that just turning point or tipping point, as you said, of this is becoming a mainstream topic of conversation where communities have been dealing with this for decades and centuries, but now it seems like more people are willing to really examine what's going on and examine their own roles in it.
Yeah, I think it's really, again, I'm really hopeful. I'm really optimistic. You know, I bought a Black Lives Matter shirt from Juxtaposition Arts probably 5 years ago. And I like can kind of gauge a little bit of society based on like reactions. Like the first couple years I wore it, you know, it was like I got stared at. And then it got to be like you know, with some head nods or whatever. But this is the first time I can remember like the phrase Black Lives Matter is it's just fact. It's not really even like my Republican friends, they're like, oh, Black Lives Matter. This it feels like a turning point in in the world right now. Um, again, we're like saying Black Lives Matter is not controversial anymore. It's just plain out fact. It was like, yeah, when all of the logos, I have a friend who works for a major corporation, and the fight that she had to have in her company to post a rainbow logo in June. Like this was a couple years ago. But it feels like now it's like duh, and it almost feels like a little pandering when people do the rainbow logos, but it almost feels like Black Lives Matter like hit a tipping point like that where it's maybe some of the fights, the internal fights are like lessening, and like, yes, we can say this on our social page, and yes, we can post a black square. um, and so I'm really hopeful to see what how the movement progresses, and what the city council, the meaningful steps that they're going to take on the police. I'm really hopeful that, again, like real change is right on the horizon.
Yeah, I hope so too. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. It's just really good to connect with you and find out how everything's going, and obviously sending you all the best. And First Avenue is in a lot of our hearts and minds right now, and I know we're all looking forward to that day when we can gather together again and see some live
Yeah.
music, man.
I mean, can you imagine the first show? I
No.
mean, I just like just tears. I mean, maybe it'll be the Current's birthday party in January. I hear the vaccine available. Maybe.
I can't remember who said it, but a few weeks ago, an artist was like, "I just want someone to sing into my face right now." And I feel like that. Like, yeah, I just want someone to just
Oh,
be right there.
I mean, no. I mean, thank God I'm getting like my live music from the Current these days and some streams, and it's like, man, just to be in person drinking like a warm beer smushed up against other people would be
Hmm.
fucking awesome right now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
Well, I'm
thank you
glad
so
you and
much.
Columbo moved. I can't see him anymore,
Oh
but
yeah, he's gonna go see if it's lunchtime.
nice. Okay, better go feed him.
Oh, well, this was so nice to see you. Thank you again for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.
All
Talk to you
right, we'll
soon.
see you soon. Bye.
Bye.